Mary Steenburgen. I studied with
Sandy Meisner, which was a blessing, yes.
What it was like to be taught by Mr. Meisner himself, and if you have any good stories about him.
I didn't even know which one Sandy Meisner was. I just knew there was this name of this great teacher, Sandy Meisner. And actually there was a fellow named Paul Morrison who was the director of the school, and when he walked in I thought, well, that's Sandy Meisner. And he was very sweet and gentle, and I thought, he's not as tough as they said he was. And then when Sandy walked in the room and started talking, I realized, oh, this is Sandy Meisner, because he was pretty terrifying. He really couldn't abide anything that was untrue, and he was tough on us, and in the end defined for me what the word teacher means. He gave that word a whole new meaning for me.
We were the last class to study with Sandy before he had his larynx removed. So kids that studied with him after that heard him speak, you know, and of course he was a terrible smoker. I mean, I mean, we all may be getting something just due to the secondhand smoke in the room, because all these teachers sat there and smoked. And I was just there the other day in this same room that used to be filled with smoke, and it's the same chairs and the same rickety old bed that people do improv stuff. And, you know, the only difference is maybe that Sandy is not there and there's no smoke. But he was incredible. He was scary. He was wonderful. He taught me what a teacher is. I wanted, like everybody, I wanted his approval desperately, and he took us through his method, and, you know, some of what acting is alchemy, and it's what your life, it's what's inside of you, or the life that you're leading, or the way your mind works, but some of it can be helped by teaching, some of it. And to the degree that it could be helped by teaching, I had an incredible teacher. And
in the first class that we had, Sandy asked, what do you think is the craft of acting? What is acting? And it was the first class, the first day, and some poor schmuck raised his hand and started telling everything he learned in college about acting, and went on and on and on. And Sandy listened for a few minutes, and he finally went, "Shut up, you talk too much." And with a twinkle in his eye. I mean, he wasn't, but his point was made, you know, that it wasn't a school for sort of working from here. And he said, the seed to the craft of acting is the reality of doing. It's the first thing he ever taught us. And from there, I was on a roller coaster of 2 years of his method. We got to a place in the method that's called emotional preparation, which is your way of becoming emotional for a scene. If you have to cry, or if you have to laugh, or whatever you have to feel, or for a scene, it's a way of preparing for that. And when that happened, suddenly I had the bull by the horns, because I had for years been, you know, my mother was always opening the bathroom door, and I would be in there sobbing my guts out. And she said, "Well, what's the matter with you?" And I was embarrassed to tell her that I was acting by myself in the bathroom, that it was just, I had gone into these kind of fantasies that would make me cry or laugh or whatever. And they all thought I was a little bonkers, but suddenly what had been crazy in Arkansas made sense in New York at the neighborhood playhouse.
Now stay that way and begin.
I do remember one little thing I could tell you is just that he, you know, we revered him and we're terrified of him. And so I remember doing some scene from some play, and there was a moment of total indecision. And I was having trouble getting to that place. And so at the end of it, you know, he like puts his cigarette down and he stands up. And of course I'm like, oh my God, what's gonna happen? And he walks over to me and he goes, "Get on your knees." And I'm like, you know, so I quickly got down on my knees, and then he put his hands on my head and he goes, "Now get up." And so I kind of went like, and he was pressing down. So I went like that, and he goes, screamed, "Get up!" like that. So I really tried, and then, ensued this like incredible battle of trying to get up with his hands pressing down on my head. And finally, after a few minutes of it, he goes, "That's the feeling." And it was like, okay, I got it. Wow. I got it now. Can't move either way, And so he was just such a visceral, clear teacher that if you were willing to do the work and be brave, you were going to learn something in that place.
He was the real deal. He knew so much about what it was that we were there to learn about. He had that incredible knowledge, and you wanted that. You had such a ferocity of desire about what was in his mind, which was a bad thing sometimes. I think it was really hard not to want to please him, not to want his approval.
Do you, to this day, ever work with an acting coach or a teacher, or go back and if there's, a particular role you're struggling with?
I did. I've done that a little bit with Bill Asper, and I've done that not so much, because honestly, what I do is I'll go back and look at Bill's book about Sandy, or that was the other thing. He repeated things so that I hear them in my sleep. I hear his voice. So what I really try to do is just remember to go back and do what he taught me to do. And when I'm struggling, it's usually because I'm not doing that. And a huge part of what he is talking about, and I'm sure you're all familiar with his work, but a huge part of it is that you've got all your attention on that other person, and it's so hard as an actor to do that, because we're all so self-conscious. We probably wouldn't be doing what we're doing if we're not a little screwed up in there somewhere. And it's so hard to take the attention off yourself, but when you do that and you fully put your attention, not looking at them, not just listening to them, but you're not going to miss a blink of their eye or a little curl of their mouth or any little thing. When you're really putting your attention on the other person, magical things happen. And that stuff that you sat around thinking how brilliant it was going to be, the night before or on the way to work, that flies out the window, because they're making you do what you do. You didn't plan that nod and that, or that laugh, I made you do that. And that's when that's alive, and that's the life of acting. And, the seed to the craft of acting is the reality of doing. And the other part to that is really doing. What are you doing? Well, really do that, If you're working with props, or you're doing something with props, it's not, really do what you're doing, and I love that. When I go back to that, I find my work is much better. Do I hit it 100% of the time? No.
So we don't know too much about your character's backstory in this movie, but we can sort of guess some of it from her reactions. Are you the kind of actor who creates that kind of thing for yourself, or do you need that to kind of prepare for the role?
If it's just something rattling around your head so that you can show off how many facts you've got about your character, it's not really useful. On the other hand, being lazy about your character and not answering, not making her real for yourself is worse. So
Sandy used to say, you can do all the research in the world, but if it doesn't result in behavior, it doesn't mean anything. So crowding your head with facts is, if it does something to you, I suppose it's worth it. But the main thing is to find things that you understand about that person on an emotional level. So, in an ideal world, you do it all. So, but it'll do you no good if it doesn't connect to you. The weird little, I always picture myself like, those in old Chinese apothecary shops, like those cabinets with all these drawers, and you know, you have to take a little of this of that drawer and a little of this of that drawer, and you know, they're all parts of you, but it's the alchemy that you mix for each character is all parts of you, you know. And if you don't understand which doors to open from your research, it hasn't really done anything for you.
So many memories, and they're all, luckily for me, very vital. They're there. That was the legacy he gave all of us. He is utterly, and his words are utterly unforgettable.
Want to know, what advice would you give to an actress starting out at 40? P.S. You're the best.
Oh, thank you. Well, I started writing music at 54. So the first thing I would say to you is I don't believe in, you know, limitations on dreams, and but I do believe in super hard work, and I think it's one of the things about starting music at 54 is that I was always the most inexperienced person in the room, and it's interesting to be that. So it's very humbling, and it's humbling to be a beginner again, and but as far as advice, I mean, I would just say, short of doing something that you'd be ashamed of or is against your, you know, what your soul tells you not to, I would try to just be in anything you can be in. Find showcases, find school things, find you know, class things, find any way to just work on your craft and work on. The more parts you play, you know, the more it just leads to more work. It's just one of those things that makes no sense, like leaning away from the hill when you're skiing, but it's the way you're supposed to do it, you know, and you just get yourself out there, and plays are, you know, especially focus on theater. I think it's so important in confidence. You know, most of the great directors I've worked with have said, you know, there's a big difference among actors when somebody's been able to stand on that stage and do that. It's really some chops that are good for us, for all of us. And it's scary, but it's true.
And what?
I'm a big believer in saying yes, and this whole thing about I don't do that, or I can't do that, or I don't have a musical bone in my body, I don't have an artistic bone in my body, and you know, it's like, you won't. Yeah, you won't. You will never do that. But if you actually try and practice and like make the effort, you'd be surprised what you can do. I mean, I just think it's sad that people have a cutoff date for growth and dreams. And, you know, we tell our kids when they say, oh, I can't do it, you go, of course you can. You give them this lecture. And then what is that like shelf date that's no longer true for a human being? So I guess I'm like, I don't know. I'm a diehard believer in the ability of the human mind to keep growing.
I'd say also that when I was 19 and left Arkansas to go to New York to study theater, that was a pretty big leap.
Okay.
I believe in taking those leaps throughout your life, though. I think if you don't keep doing that and scaring yourself and saying yes to things that are scary to you all along, that life gets a little sad.
A little too comfortable, too.
Yeah.
But what was it like?
Before that, you had grown up in Arkansas, and you knew you wanted to be an actor from a relatively young age. When did you kind of decide that was going to be your goal and your dream?
Books were my solace and my place where I could be a whole person and get mad and get angry and not make waves and not kill anybody. And then when I grew up, it just was a natural thing to put that on its feet, you know. And so, and to this day, the safest world for me, it's always been this, you know. It's safer for me to be on a stage than to go to a party, you know. And it's like the opposite of, I know it's like crazy because people think, you know, I mean, I'm fairly political person. I've stood in front of crowds and stuff, and they're like, how do you do that? And I go, well, that's where I'm safe. Is that fair? So it doesn't make sense on paper, but it makes sense emotionally to me. And even all these years later, even though I understand it, it's just who I am, you know. And
then is it true your one of your professors actually encouraged you to leave?
Yeah, he, you know, he said, you really don't belong here. You should go to New York where they know what to do with you. And he gave me this list of schools, which I still have. And he said, these are all really good schools, but there's one that's extraordinary because of this one person that's there. And somehow he knew about Sandy Meisner, you know, and there's a check by that one school where I checked it, and that's the only one I applied to. So I really didn't have a backup plan if I didn't get in the Playhouse, but I did.
Did you get in before you moved to New York, or did you have to move there?
No, I flew to Dallas, and my second flight of my life, I flew to Dallas and met with a man that was a regional rep for the school, and just talked to him about my feelings about acting. And then we waited and waited and waited, and my mother called me one day and she said, there's an envelope here from the neighborhood Playhouse. And I said, is it fat or is it thin? And she said, it's really fat. I said, good. So she opened it and we just screamed and cried. And, you know, they were amazing people, because my dad was a freight train conductor and my mom was a secretary. And it was terrifying to have your daughter go off to this huge city where we didn't know a single soul, and to do this thing that was so far from our experience. You know, it wasn't as if we knew actors. They weren't even real to us. And so, but they were so brave. And they would say to people years later, when people would say to my dad, you should tell Mary she should come back home, you know, she can be a teacher or something. My dad go, oh no, she's gonna make it, you'll see, you know. And he was actually proud of me when I was a waitress in New York. He just thought that was cool, that I was brave enough to go do that, you know. So that was, you know, that was pretty cool to swim in, that kind of love. I had studied for 2 years at the neighborhood Playhouse, then got out and picked exactly the wrong agent to represent me. We had a showcase where 9 different agents contacted me. I zeroed in on the one who really had zero interest in me and was exclusively signed for a year. He didn't send me out on one audition in 1 year. So at the end of that year, I joined a comedy improv group with 4 or 5 other members of the neighborhood Playhouse. Occasionally we get bus fare or something, but that was it. So I worked for many years as a waitress in New York and waited tables for many years. And then I went to a casting interview for a general casting interview with a really great casting director. And I was almost out the door when I said, are you casting anything in particular? And she said, well, we're looking to find the lead in a movie called Going South with Jack Nicholson, and he's directing. And she said, but I think we're seeing well-known actresses or beautiful models, which I think is what he'd asked for. And I said, well, I'm just gonna sit out there till you give me a script. And she looked at me like, wow, that was pushy. And somebody else went in, and I sat there for a minute thinking, I just blew the coolest casting director in New York, you know, off by saying, I just disrespected her. When that door opens, I'm going to go in and apologize. And I'm sitting there looking at the ground and formulating the apology when I see these 2 feet and this unmistakable voice, who I didn't know he was in New York. He goes, are you waiting to see me? And it's Jack Nicholson. And I said, no. And he said, why not? And I said, well, I don't have a script. And he went over, picked up a script, handed it to me, and said, 10 minutes tomorrow, you know, be here at 2 o'clock. Mm-hmm. So I stayed up all night, worked on everything the way Sandy would have told me to work on it. And then I went in the next day, kind of dressed in what I thought was sort of like 1800s, vaguely. I probably looked ridiculous. And I went in and I started reading, and then I finished a couple of scenes, and he goes, okay, well, read this. And I read that, and then his pizza came, and I stood up to leave, and he goes, sit down, eat the pizza, keep reading, keep reading. We were literally reading every scene in the movie twice. Wow. And then at the end of it, he goes, so where have you been? I said, well, I've been here for 6 years. And he said, and you've done, I said, well, not anything you ever would have seen, you know. And he said, well, you understand that I want to direct this. And I went, yes. And then I asked people, I don't know what that, didn't understand. What does that mean? And they said, that means he can't cast you because he needs a big star, you know. And I'm like, who knew the Hollywood doublespeak all those years ago in New York? So they flew me to Hollywood for a screen test with 6 other actresses who were all huge stars who'd been in front of the camera a million times. I had no clue about any of that. And on the day that I was supposed to go to my waitressing shift at the Magic Pan, and I'd run out of money. Magic Pan, like little crepes served in a little French dirndl. And so I went into Paramount to say goodbye to them and to ask them if I could have my one night's hotel bill reimbursement in cash, because I literally didn't have enough money to get from Kennedy into this city, even by public transportation. So I said, thank you so much for that great experience. Because everybody had said, they're not going to cast you. You have a weird last name and no one's ever heard of you. And you have no experience. And so I said, thank you for the experience. Can I have my one night's hotel bill in cash? And Jack's smoking a big cigar and he goes, sit down, kid, don't worry about it. You're on the payroll. And it was like, I made them call my parents and tell them it was real. You know, it was just surreal. And my life changed in that instant. My first day's work, my first shot, I had to drive a buckboard, pulled by a horse, up to like the equivalent of about 2 or 3 city blocks, up to a kind of big rock and make sure the horse's nose is even with the rock. Tie up the buckboard, get out, pull out a bag and a pick and a pen and some ink, dip the pen in the ink, roll out a piece of paper, get him to sign it, blow on it, roll it back up, and then exit the shot. That was my first shot ever in film. And so at the end of it, he calls me Chair, which is a nickname from the movie. So at the end of it, he goes, Chair? And I go, yes. And he goes, it's the hardest shot you're ever going to do in your whole friggin' career. So
really,
he didn't say friggin'.
Yeah,
but and he said, so he made it go first.
Yeah.
He said, you'll never have to do anything harder than that, and I never have. I mean, in terms of props, and you know, that was the hardest thing. He taught me. I left out that he, in the 2 months before we shot Going South in Mexico, they had me come out and stay at the Chateau Marmont, and my job every day was to drive to Paramount, go sit in a screening room, and he screened movies for me that he thought I should be aware of. So I saw these wonderful Jean Arthur comedies and Judy Holliday and you know, It Should Happen to You and you know, a million different wonderful comedies from the, you know, 30s, from the 40s and 50s, and Pat and Mike, and you know, and he would then come in at the end of it and say, now, what did she do in that movie that was interesting? Or he would talk about the way she used the camera, or talk about the way she related to the other actor, or just talk about the lightness of it or the tone of it. You know, I didn't know there was such a thing as tone in movies. I hadn't seen any of these films. Really? Never, no. It just wasn't a part of my culture growing up. I mean, I saw, you know, I just saw whatever was at the little local cinema, which was not kind of these wonderful classic films.
Yeah. And you also won an Oscar for Melvin and Howard. A relatively young age, relatively early in your career. What was that experience like? I mean, was that something that you could prepare for in any way?
Well, it is that great quote-unquote overnight success that you'd spent 6 years working for.
I know. I always make sure, because I speak at schools quite a bit. I just spoke at the Neighborhood Playhouse last week, actually, and I do always make sure that I talk about not just the discovery story, but the years before it, because it doesn't usually happen overnight.
You know, I waitressed for like almost 7 years, and then did comedy improv at night and at the Manhattan Theater Club, and we eventually became the resident company there. And I said, boy, if you don't have to do it, don't do it, because it's hard, you know, whether you're successful, and it's even harder if you're not, you know.
And I remember an actual moment where I looked in the mirror at one point, and this is in my 6th year of waitressing, and I remember looking in the mirror, and I had this stupid little outfit on that was supposed to look like a French country crepe maker. And I remember looking in the mirror and saying, this could be your life. You might be doing this forever, waitressing and acting, but acting for no money for the rest of your life. Is that okay with you? And I realized it was okay with me, because I loved it so much and I appreciated it so much, and I was having such a good time when it wasn't, I could have had a VA, when most of the time I was having such a good time that I was willing, you know.
I still feel that I get to do what this incredible profession, which is just a privilege to do. There's so many people that dream of doing it, and I feel so lucky, you know. And by the way, I felt lucky when I was waitressing and doing it, because I was in New York City, you know, and occasionally people would come see us, and it was great. So
now, one wonders, and I've wondered, how long would I have lasted never making a living at acting and always being a waitress? I don't know, you know, but I'd like to think I'd still be like I still practice carrying my plates just in case.
Serve the crepes with the smile of the crepe pointing up. And
if the script is good and everybody's doing their work, you're kind of in a situation where it's likely to go well, because you're there with a common purpose. And part of the magic of what we do for a living is that there are very few things anymore that are not solitary. Everybody's sitting in front of their computer or their phone, or and even or in their cubicle, and making a movie or doing a play or doing a TV show. It's like raising the tent at the circus. You need everybody pulling on it, and so guys like that, it's like they're part of my team, and there'd be something wrong if I didn't have chemistry with them,
But you've worked with so many amazing directors. I mean, what do you think makes a good director? What do you hope for when you show up to set?
Well, I think what everybody thinks is that they constantly tell you all this interesting stuff to do. And I think the biggest thing a director does has to do with casting. And then I think the other thing is that they create a world that is safe and amazing and inspirational for you to play in, and they put a safety net there that makes you feel like you can fly. If that's not there, you're always like there's some little part of you that's protecting yourself, And somebody like Jonathan Demme, it's not that he says anything so special to you. It's like
a magnificent, enormous spirit. And he, like Demetri Martin or my friend Will Forte, these are people who haven't tried to conform their way of seeing the world into something that feels appropriate to the business or for any reason. And Jonathan would direct you by doing things like, I remember there was a day on Melvin and Howard where we'd been shooting for quite a while, and we had been kicked out of our hotel because they didn't like what we were making a movie about, some of the big wigs in Vegas. Anyway, there was just a lot had gone down, and it was toward the end of the movie, and everybody was a little tired and missing home. And I go to work, and we're shooting my wedding that day, and I'm like out to here pregnant, getting married in a wedding chapel in Vegas. And Jonathan comes to work and he's in this like crazy, fantastic pinstripe suit with a flower in the lapel and like a silk tie and all this. And I'm like, wait, are you doing some kind of interview or something today? And he's like, no. And I said, why are you dressed like that? And he said, I'm going to your wedding. And that was the only direction he had to give me. And suddenly it was like, and I'm going to my wedding too, you know? And it was like he was there to play with you. And I remember also in Philadelphia, every single person in that jury on Philadelphia was handcast by Jonathan. Even though they might not have lines, he wanted that face to say so much, you know. He also made it clear that everybody on that set, if they had an idea or a suggestion, you know, whoever you are on that set, he wanted to hear it. It wasn't like just let me hear from the producers or the above the line people. He wasn't like that. And he was just a magnificent human being.
On the day that you're shooting the wedding scene, when everybody's kind of tired and it's toward the end of the movie, he shows up in a tuxedo with a red carnation. And that was all I needed to know. I was getting married that day, you know, and he like, you know, changed that day for me. And
you were already familiar with Demetri Martin's drawings and stand-up before you got involved with the project, is that right? So what was he like to work with as a director? I mean, he's such a visual stylist as an artist. I mean, how did that translate as to being a director of a feature film?
In terms of the first-time directorness of it all, I've worked with a lot of first-time directors, and he like apologized 25,000 times a day for like every direction. Sorry, every direction. He was like, you know, and I don't need to tell you. And I'm like, Demetri, you're the director. I'm the actor. I actually like direction. I want to hear it. You know, if you have the slightest thought, I want to hear it. And he did. I think he grew visibly more confident, and I'm sure he will be more so on his next film. And I think he's an important voice. I feel like he's the real deal, you know? You're there to fulfill their vision and not to just stay stuck on your own, you know? So I always feel like each one has been a completely unique experience.
I mean, it seems like looking at your resume, you've always worked, but really like the last couple of years, you're like one of the busiest people in the business. Does it feel that way to you, or?
it feels like I'm very busy now. I honestly do credit that. I think part of it is that at this moment in time, I'm the best represented I've ever been in my whole career. I feel like I'm very blessed to work with them because they're creative and they're doing their job and they're not phoning anything in. You know, they get excited and they're passionate and they're artists in their own way. So the material that they're drawn to is material I tend to like, and so that's exciting when you're in that collaboration as opposed to it just being a sort of business relationship. And
so there's never a time when one of us is sort of we're both free. So what that does mean is that the person who's free has to help the other person learn their lines. So we work together every night because every night I'm helping him learn his lines, and every night he helps me learn mine when we're shooting. So I really love working with him because he's a freaking ridiculously talented actor, and he inspires me to be a better actor. And he's, I was a fan of his. Anybody that's done comedy and drama knows how much harder comedy is. It's so delicate. It can't be taught. Funny is so individualized. You can't copy it. It's its own really tricky thing. And I used to watch Cheers before I knew him and just marvel at the delicate, beautiful ice skating that he and Shelley and then he and Kirsty did in those boy-girl scenes. And I just always thought it was brilliant. And when I was going through some sad times in my life, that's the show I would watch at the end of the day instead of the news, to make me feel better. And then I just discovered it was just easier to sleep with Sam the bartender.
That's the secret.